the UK's ICO has given a blanket warning for everything that concerns emotion recognition AI. They say this is impossible. There's no established science behind it, and it is being sold for human resources, recruiting, and personality assessments. But there is no there's just no meaningful data behind it. You make meaningful decisions based on meaningless data in really high risk context where people are really affected by the decisions you take, and that's just not possible. So I think there's no connection between the companies and the AI application that they're using. They just use it because it has been sold to them as something that will make life easier and better and look fancy.
Hello everyone, welcome to another episode of the D4 Data Channel podcast. I'm your host Deepak, and with me we have Ms. Dorothea Baur. Dorothea is a ethics and strategy consultant in tech and finance domain, wherein she offers services to companies and decision makers to align with their business strategy and ethics. She's a speaker, teacher, and the owner of Baur Consulting. It's a pleasure to have you here today, Dorothea, and thank you for accepting my invitation.
Thanks a lot for having me. My pleasure.
Great. So I have a couple of questions for you today, and starting with this one. So, what are some of the AI risks that business are concerned about, and how can be addressed before implementing the solution?
Well, I think at the moment with AI, we're still at the stage where businesses are only concerned about ethical issues once these ethical issues negatively impact their bottom line. So, which is maybe not a surprise, because why should they care about ethics if they can get away without being ethical? But so the issues that they're concerned about is when business risks and ethical risks coincide. And we're talking about material issues here. An issue is material when it has the potential to negatively impact your business. So, for example, if a business sells an AI application that causes an outcry because of lousy privacy protections, and if this then backfires on your sale, then the ethical issue, like privacy and the business risk, coincide. But so these are the issues they're concerned about, but it's not in the first line. It's not the ethical issues, it's more the business damage. And sometimes businesses also get away with being unethical if there is no one who protests against ethics. If you don't have employees who are upset when you, for example, sell AI surveillance technology to a non-democratic regime which might use this technology to oppress their people and to commit further human rights violations, then, or if your shareholders don't protest against that, then you get away with it. So I think we're still at an early stage in terms of ethical issues when it comes to AI, where businesses only react once it hits their bottom line.
Okay, got it. So over to the next question. So this some of the recent posts which I was actually reading through. So it's regarding the sexual bias shown by the recent diffusion text to image model, in which women are depicted very wrongfully in comparison to men. And even though there is a lot of talk about this AI ethics and so on, like it's never being put into practice by even notable organizations. So what could be the possible cause for this?
Well, I think for one thing, those models are trained on specific data sets, and the outputs of those models mirror the inputs on which the models have been trained. So if you have a data set that consists of half-naked women and fully dressed men, AI will associate being female with being half-naked and being male with being, dressed appropriately. So in the case of AI applications, I think one of the problems is an intransparency of the supply chain. When you subscribe, you don't develop it yourself, but you subscribe to or you buy an AI application, who makes the effort to ask about the data set on which it has been trained? You're being sold a solution. You don't want to have problems. So nowadays, when it comes to food, for example, we have declarations of origin on bananas. I know my bananas come from Colombia, fair trade or organic. So I have some idea about the processes behind those bananas. when I buy AI, I know nothing. So that's I think why it's not being implemented into practice, because there's also often a division between those who develop and those who use AI, and so there's still really some need for education and awareness in that regard.
True, true. So, what are the various dimensions that are important in the perspective of like AI ethics?
Well, just as I said, you should only implement AI when you understand how the application has been created. So you should do some kind of ethical impact assessment. There are like, guidelines for such procedures. You should really try to anticipate all kinds of risks, and you make sure that when you sell AI, you always do so with substantial training for those who use it, so that they know the limits of what AI can do for them. So make sure you really have a proper customer service, like really with people who are able to answer questions. And when you are the organization that uses AI, you make sure that you have humans who are competent. They don't necessarily need to have the full skills to develop the AI application themselves, but they need to understand how it works. And of course, one of the biggest challenges is that sometimes not even those who create AI know why it works the way it does. And that's like the inherent opacity of deep learning and big data. That's something we really struggle with at the moment.
Okay, okay, got it. So, over to the model aspect, like, so who is responsible for AI's mistakes and what to do about the unintended consequences of AI?
Well, that's a very difficult question, and I'm surely no single person or no single actor wants to assume responsibility. It's like it's an interplay throughout the entire value chain, and due diligence must be conducted all along, as I said before, with bananas or other products, and you can't say this is the one person, because that would be unfair. But as to the unintended consequences, what to do about them, I think how much importance you assign to the unintended consequences really depends on what is at stake. So when the stakes are high, for example, when AI is used to make a life or death decision in medicine, your tolerance for unintended consequences should be effectively zero. That is, you probably should not use AI in such context at all. But when AI is used in low risk contexts where not much is at stake, it's probably sufficient to just monitor and think about what to improve in hindsight. I mean, after you have developed it responsibly, of course. But so I know, for example, recommender algorithms that we find on Netflix, on Amazon, everywhere where we consume something, they are not undisputed. But honestly, for me, recommendations for books I get from Amazon are not a high stake issue for me, and I don't see how they could be a high stake issue. You can basically let the algorithm do its job when you're Amazon, and then just make sure that you evaluate continuously whether, for example, this algorithm has a tendency to favor some authors over other in an unjustified manner, or whether the algorithm creates some kind of literary segregation, along ethnicities or class, etc. And then it's okay to tweak the algorithm, or like to go back and revise to generate a more diverse outcome in hindsight. Well, that's my personal opinion. I know other people are more critical towards that. And so I really think that's a bit what the EU does. They differentiate the attention you should give to unintended consequences depending on the level of risk you're taking. And when you're in a low stake context, it has a totally different dimension than when you're using AI, as I said, in life or death, or in the justice system, etc.
Got it, got it. So, in this regard, like, so what are the ethical considerations that should be like taken care in each stage of the AI life cycle?
Well, I think when you're planning and building, I didn't address that before, but you really should make sure that the team that develops AI mirrors a bit the context where the AI will be used. So it's really important to have an interdisciplinary team, um, often in terms of gender, sometimes ethnicities, sometimes age, etc. And because those people will be sensitized to the issues that they could face once the AI is used upon them. So when you're planning, you need to make sure you have an interdisciplinary team. Also, of course, interdisciplinary, not a diverse team in terms of gender, age, ethnicity, etc. But also in terms of disciplinary background, you need to have engineers and social scientists, and they need to be able to talk to each other. And that's not always so easy. Sometimes there is a lot of prejudice between the disciplines, and they talk past each other. It's really kind of a challenge for a lot of teams to have this interdisciplinary team practice. So, but internally, by securing that you have such a team, which does not always need to encompass all the dimensions of diversity. It really depends. If you're a Swiss company that is planning to use AI in a Swiss context, like for a specific customer group, or in a B2B context, you don't need to make sure that you have represented everyone along their identity. But still, think ahead. And then also, while you're planning it and developing it, you should already involve stakeholders. You should involve those who will use it, those who will be affected by it, effectively, impact assessment, etc. And then, of course, as I said before, check the data set. How has the model been trained? Is it representative data? And is the context where you're planning to use AI, is it an appropriate context for the training context of the AI? Can it be generalized? There's a lot of generalization errors in AI, where AI is developed in one context and then applied in another context, and it's just different parameters. And all these issues, so it's continuously along all stages of planning, building, deploying. You need to have the ethical dimension in mind, which you secure by involving a variety of people, and closely looking at the data set, and then also have a feedback loop at the end once it's out there. Don't just let AI application run wild. Gather feedback, as I said before. If necessary, go back to your data, improve it. It's a continuous process.
True, true. Completely agree to that
Uh,
point, actually. So, regarding the large language models which are in place at this point, like there are various challenges such as biases, memorization, privacy leaks, vulnerability to adversarial attacks, and so on. So this is also extended to like different downstream models as well. So, do you think there is any chance of achieving sustainable AI development with these large language models?
Well, I'm not an engineer, so I am really not in a position to judge, the technical side, like privacy leaks and adversarial attacks or technical issues. I hope they will go away, or we'll find a way to kind of contain them. But my opinion is not qualified here. But I think that, some of the challenges are really inherent to AI. There are inherent challenges to machine learning or deep learning, such as AI can only learn from data, and data necessarily always represents the past. So AI will always make projections of the future, or make predictions based on what has already happened before. So that means that AI has no notion of unprecedented events. And if we want AI to build or to predict a future that is better than our past, we need to actively interfere. And this is then kind of comparable to affirmative action. We would have to give AI commands about what to achieve. But then, and this is the irony, then we take away that which makes AI unique, or that which led us to develop AI in the first place, namely the hope that AI makes better decisions than we do. And I think this is the inherent challenge. So, how can AI be better than we are if it has to be trained on a past that has been shaped by us?
True, true.
Yeah.
So, what are some of the regulations and governing bodies that ensures AI ethics and responsibility?
Well, over the past year, there has been a mushrooming of like soft law and standards, and it sometimes looks like every single international and national organization and every industry association and every company had their AI principles, and they often sounded very much alike. And but now, I think it is the one regulation that is really upcoming and that is having a potential to really have some traction is the EU AI Act, because this is going to be the furthest reaching. Of course, I'm biased because I'm Swiss. I'm not part of the EU, but we are an island within the EU, like a non-member island. So I'm surrounded by EU regulation, and so the EU AI Act will significantly raise the bar for AI ethical guidelines also, because it will be binding. It will come from a very powerful actor, and it follows a distinctive approach that I've mentioned before. I think that where you classify the standards that AI has to meet based on the level of risk you're taking on. So this will really, I think, raise the bar, but it can never be enough to have just one body like the EU and then it's done. It's still important that this like supranational law will be complemented by national law or by soft law from companies, etc. It has to be a puzzle where the different pieces match. So overall, it's still a mess, but I think it's taking a bit of shape in the next few months or years.
Yeah, really glad to know that, because that's I feel that's extremely important actually.
Yes.
And over to the other aspects related to this. So, like regarding transparency in AI solutions. So, transparency in AI solution is extremely important to build trust within a business. And like, what are your thoughts on that particular part?
Well, I think transparency is necessary but not sufficient because in order to make sense of transparency, you need to have a really sound understanding of the mechanisms. What does transparency mean? If you showed, some kind of algorithm to me, I wouldn't be able to understand it. So I think it's necessary but not sufficient. We need a lot of training. We need those guidelines. Also, like the laws which will make it not necessary for everyone to understand the full details, but where you can kind of substitute it with trust, where you can just have certain trust level of trust that you can trust that it has been developed in a certain way and that it works. So yes, transparency is important, but also what kind of works against transparency is the whole how do you call intellectual property stuff. Of course, that's the black box where companies often use it to excuse as an excuse to not be transparent about their business model, etc. So I think there are like different areas of law that kind of collide, and we need to find a way for these conflicts to be resolved.
Okay, okay, got it. And you did mention a particular point where, like, what if, so regarding the connection which the business has to make with these complex AI models, so they definitely has to understand before defining the ethical constraints. So how hard is it actually in the current landscape to have that kind of a connection?
Well, I think it's very hard because there are no established guidelines yet, and there's a lot of also, as we call it, snake oil that is being sold. Things that apparently, are promised to work and to deliver some results where, no science is behind it. Just yesterday, I read in the Guardian that the UK's ICO, the Commissioner, Information Commissioner Office, has given a blanket warning for everything that concerns emotion recognition AI. They say this is impossible. There's no established science behind it, and it is being sold for human resources, recruiting, and personality assessments. But there is no there's just no meaningful data behind it. You make meaningful decisions based on meaningless data in really high risk context where people are really affected by the decisions you take, and that's just not possible. So I think there's really oftentimes there's no connection between the companies and the AI application that they're using. They just use it because it has been sold to them as something that will make life easier and better and look fancy.
Okay, okay. So regarding the centralization, so AI operations mainly vary, like it varies significantly across different demographic regions. So like, do you believe that a centralized approach or particular guidance across different teams, academic, industry, both as well, like would help in bridging the kind of gap between these kind of developments, basically?
Well, I think centralized is a bit of a difficult term. I think, as I said before, interdisciplinary also in terms of academic and corporate and political context, they need to work together. But um, as I said before, when you think about that fact that AI can be developed in one context and applied to another, and then it's not valid anymore, there's always a lot of regional, local, or contextual nuance you need to give to the AI. So a centralized approach for, steering the application of AI is not even desirable, because, as I said, the context in which it is applied really varies, and there should be a centralized approach in terms of a least common denominator of basic principles, like we have, a Universal Declaration of Human Rights, where everyone on paper signs, that we respect these human rights. But when it comes to the implementation, we need to be aware that there are cultural differences, and that we need to work also locally or regionally, or also within certain industries differently than we do in others.
Cool, cool. Yeah.
Yeah.
So, yeah, over to the experience where like you have been working in this industry for quite some time right now. So, could you talk about your line of work and your experience working in this field so far?
Yeah, so Switzerland is never as advanced as, the US when it comes to AI ethics, or as the EU. So companies here are still lagging behind, even though we have big tech companies in Switzerland, but the Swiss companies, there is not much awareness, and they can't even tell you whether they use AI properly. Nevertheless, there is a huge demand in terms of, you call it, I think, continuing education. So I'm lecturing a lot on AI and ethics in various degrees for people who come from practice. They're like, not like young students, but experienced people, and they come from all kinds of companies. And so I see that companies are preparing their workforce or their employees for these issues. But so there is no big consulting branch yet in Switzerland specifically focusing on AI ethics. We do have some stuff about corporate digital responsibility, where this, might also play a role, AI and ethics, but specifically it's not that advanced yet. So it's mostly lecturing to people from practice, but it's also a lot of engagement in international initiatives, like this one initiative I'm involved in. It's called For Humanity, and it's a non-profit volunteering organization that's creating a independent third-party auditing system for AI, comparable to the structure we have in the financial services sector. So yes, I'm active mostly in international initiatives, and in lecturing, as I said, in to practitioners, but also, for example, I'm invited for keynotes. For example, a pharmaceutical company wants to know how they can use AI, or should they use AI in targeted advertising, when it is about identifying potential patients, for example. Would it be ethical to use AI for targeted advertising, or what are the limits there? So interest is growing, but it's not yet, I mean, like a fully fledged consulting business in Switzerland, at least.
Okay, okay. So, in this regard, like, do you have some interesting case studies to share with us?
Well, when I um, talk to students, or when I teach to these people from practice, I always make sure I take different contexts. But I must say, most of them come from the Anglo-Saxon context. I don't know why they dominate, but it's often US, and so the applicability in Switzerland is a bit limited. But I very much like case studies. For example, the algorithm in the UK, which was supposed to predict the students' grade for their GCSE, is it called? I don't know, their final exams after high school, during the pandemic, when they couldn't take the exams, and they used an algorithm to predict the grades that they would have made if the exams had taken place, and that went totally wrong. So that's a really good example, because it was the first time in history that it triggered protest against algorithm. People going to the street, taking to the streets, like basically screw the algorithm, with worse words. And so that's a wake up call. Then I like a lot some of the studies, for example, on an interlocking web of algorithms in the US, where suddenly you see a pattern repeated in your life, where you're being discriminated, or like treated unfairly, as a tenant, as a welfare recipient, as a credit applicant, etc. And then you realize that different instances, companies or authorities are using the same algorithm with the same bias. And then suddenly, when all this is applied to you and you happen to have a demographic profile of someone who is not favored by this algorithm, you find yourself on a path to not hell, but you're really like locked up in a web of algorithms that kind of work together. So I like these type of studies, and even though they're not yet tangible for us here in Switzerland, or maybe they might still sound very US specific, I think we should take them as early warning signs of what could happen if we don't do anything now.
Right, right. So yeah, I can understand this particular topic is of extremely important, and like there should be proper awareness among the practitioners as well as. So, like, do you have any closing note which you would like to actually address to this particular community?
I haven't prepared anything, but I want to re-emphasize that it's really about interdisciplinarity, because this is what I also see as an ethicist in the field. When I follow debates online, I think it's a real challenge to kind of reach a level of understanding between data scientists and people from the humanities or social scientists. So this is a huge challenge. So I really want to make a plea for that, for interdisciplinarity, and for also for finding the right balance between centralized approaches and like, okay, this is like the law that we need to have for things to work, and leaving enough room for deliberation or room discretion for deciding autonomously what to do in specific contexts. So I think these are like the biggest challenges. But I used to be more negative. At the moment, I'm pretty hopeful or also excited about this EU AI Act coming up, and it's really driving forward the debate.
Great, great.
Yeah.
So that covers all my questions for today, Dorothy, and thank you so much for sharing your experience and like your perspective regarding this particular topic. Like I personally experienced a lot of like I witnessed a lot of bias and like regarding this ethical constraints when I am actually developing something. So like this is quite common nowadays, and like I feel the importance of this particular aspect in towards ethical AI development or like sustainable AI development, and like you have been pointing into the right direction where like it should come across like or it should tie all the what to say entities together, then only a proper necessary step or an action item will be taken in this direction. So I really appreciate for sharing all your thoughts on this, Dorothy, and thank you so much.
Well, thanks again for having me. My pleasure.